You're not going to get good as fast on any given day if you don't push it as hard, but you are going to get better in the long run because you've been accumulating more classes, more sessions, more training sessions, as opposed to having a couple really good classes, getting better at a steeper rate, and then blowing something out, blowing out your back, blowing out your knee, blowing out your shoulder, and then not being able to train at all. Hey there, I'm Stefan Kesting, and this is the Strenuous Life Podcast. The focus of today's episode is going to be Q&A. Q&A from my audience, mostly my email newsletter audience. I have an email newsletter in which I put out a lot of content, mostly related to jiu-jitsu, also on the general topic of martial arts and training and, the strenuous life. But once in a while, I have a conversation with people and I ask for questions for my podcast or for articles or YouTube video suggestions. And thus the people on the newsletter get the first crack at that. So today we're going to be digging in and I'm going to try and go through as many questions as possible, even if that means going through the answers a little bit quick or making reference to other materials that I have out there or other people have out there as well. First though, I'm going to ask if you can, it would be super useful to go and get a rating and a review of this podcast on whatever platform that you listen to your podcasts on. iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, all of those places have got review mechanisms. If you would be so good as to go and give me a rating and give me a review, that stuff really helps. And hey, it's better than me monetizing this podcast. I don't want to be doing ads for stamps.com or talking about how wonderful MeUndies feel or see if I can get Condom Depot to sponsor me if they're still around. Remember them? They were a company that used to sponsor UFC fighters. So you'd have UFC fighters with a big patch almost always right on their butt saying Condom Depot. And they disappeared completely off the sponsorship scene. So anyway, if you don't want me to start out this show with a big homage to Condom Depot, how about giving me a review? I think that's a fair trade. All right, so this very first question actually came from a short email exchange that I had with Noah. He said, when you first get promoted to purple belt, what do you think you should focus on developing? To which I was on the road and I just shot back a very quick email in which I said combinations, setups, and a couple of game plans. Then his response was, I've been working on combinations recently and planned C's and D's, and I know that setups and even baiting is sort of the next frontier, but I find myself resistant to game plans. I've been encouraged toward them for a long time and written out a couple, this takedown, that pass, but they just kind of feel forced and unusable to me. Following a game plan seems prone to getting interrupted and leaving me stranded, and also like it will stymie development because I'll be trying to follow a sequence instead of intuitively recognizing and responding to situations and positions as they present. So, my question is, do you really think game plans are for everyone? And if I should avoid them because they run counter to my style or thought processes, or am I just screwing myself? I think it's important to recognize that a game plan is a starting point. So for people who don't know, a game plan typically is thought of as, all right, you and I are starting, we're on our feet, and if you're a better wrestler than I am, I'm going to pull a certain kind of guard. I might pull De La Riva guard. From De La Riva guard, my best attack is a Berimbolo. Berimbolo to the back, and from the back, I'm going to try and finish you with a bow and arrow choke. That's an example of a game plan. Another example would be pulling deep half guard, using a deep half guard sweep, going to the top, using the over-under pass, going to side mount, and finishing with an armbar from side mount. That might be an entirely legitimate game plan. Now, typically, when people talk about a game plan, they don't only mean this technique followed by that technique, followed by the next technique. Because your opponent is a living, breathing, resisting opponent. They're not always going to be giving you the same energy, the same reaction. So it means having the answer to a whole bunch of their questions, the answer to a whole bunch of their responses to your techniques at your fingertips as well. And it doesn't mean that you need to follow this. It just means that it's essentially your A game. It's your best takedown, followed by your best guard pass or guard pass sequence or cluster of guard passes, followed by your best attack sequence. So you're not always going to follow it, but it's amazing how often when you have a game plan that you do end up following it, that it does end up working out one way or another. Now, the person to first talk with me about game plans and really spell out what they meant was Brandon Mullins when we did the How to Defeat the Bigger, Stronger Opponent Series 2 set of DVDs and apps. Because he had a game plan based around the closed guard. First, you're going to try and go for this grip. Here's a million ways to get to that grip. Then, from this grip, you're going to shoot, say, a triangle choke. If you don't get the triangle choke, then you're going to respond with the armbar. If you don't get the triangle choke, if he postures up a different way, you're going to sit up and go to the hip bump sweep. If you can't get that, you're going to sit up, you're going to go to the guillotine, you're going to go back to the triangle. So it's not one technique leading to another technique. It's kind of a cluster of options leading to your next cluster of options, leading to your next cluster of options. Don't worry. Jiu-jitsu is flexible enough that you're going to be responding to tons of situations. What was it that you said? You said stymie development because you're trying to follow a sequence instead of intuitively recognizing and responding to situations and positions as they present. Don't worry. There'll be lots of that because your opponent won't only ever do one thing. Take a look at Marcelo Garcia's game. It's pretty simple, right? There aren't a whole lot of variables, and somehow he manages to impose that game plan on a huge variety of opponents. Take a look at Bernardo Faria's game. Take a look at Leandro Lo's game. It looks pretty similar. It's his game. So that's really all I mean by game plan. This is something that you can go to when the going gets tough. And it also doesn't mean that you're never going to spend time out training outside that comfort zone. Of course you are. There are going to be times, say you're going against somebody who's not as good as you are. You're going to let them start in their best position, pull off their best techniques, and all you're going to be doing is responding to them. I think the development of a game plan is pretty important, and I think it really doesn't mean a whole lot more than your best techniques and finding ways to connect together your best techniques so that you can go from technique 1, and by technique I mean cluster of techniques 1 to cluster of techniques 2. Each cluster is related in the sense that you go for the paper cutter choke, and that's the base of technique cluster 1. If your opponent responds by doing this, well, then you move to the north-south choke. If your opponent responds by doing some other thing, you go to the armbar. If your opponent responds by doing something else, you go to the mount. But it's all centered around that one technique. So I wouldn't overthink it. You don't need necessarily to write it out. You just need to know what your best techniques are and try and figure out ways to connect them together. All right, the next question comes from DJ. DJ's 52 years old. He's been training for a couple of years with moderate fitness level. His question is, when I am rolling, how should I pace myself against my younger, aggressive partners who go really hard and use strength? Should I step up the challenge to test myself or play possum and play defense? What is the best strategy for development? Thank you. All right, I'm not quite 52 yet. I'm getting close. But from personal experience, the way in which you train jiu-jitsu has to change as you get older. Danny Nosanto, one of my mentors and martial arts heroes, said it really well when he said that every 10 years, your game has to change. Techniques that you're doing in your 30s, you probably won't be doing in your 40s, and you're going to have to change everything again in your 50s, and if you're still training in your 60s, which you and I presumably hope to be doing, you're going to have to change it again then. But not only do your techniques need to change, your training methods need to change. If you try and go in there and you're not on giant amounts of steroids and giant amounts of growth hormone and you've got your anti-aging doctor just pumping you full of, whatever the stuff is that you need to create the hormonal profile of a 20-year-old, and more importantly, the ability to heal like a 20-year-old. If you're going in there with the young guys and trying to bang with them, the only thing that's going to get banged up is you. You're going to end up badly hurt, and you're not going to be able to train. So I actually don't think that trying to keep pace with the younger crowd, the 20-year-olds, the teenagers, the 30-year-olds who are going really hard, is a good idea. So should you pace yourself? Yes. And more importantly, the primary focus of your training should be to come back the next training session. I did an interview a while ago with Mordecai Finley, who you should definitely listen to. He was talking about this idea of the main goal of every training session is to come back for the next training session. So do whatever you need to do. Do whatever you need to do to not get injured and to come back the next time. Because unless you come back the next time, you're not going to get better. So if that means tapping out early, if that means not going as fast as your opponent, having him blow past your guard because he's doing some kind of cartwheel guard pass, and then taking your back and choking you out, well, then he just cartwheeled past your guard, took your back and choked you out, and you didn't get hurt because you didn't try to keep up to him on an athletic level. So of course, you should be trying to improve your athleticism. Of course, you should be trying to work on your cardio and work on your strength and keep your body together. But the focus isn't so much performance as it is longevity. So longevity in the sport, longevity in the game should be your primary focus. And I don't think that you should be training with the young punks every single day either. You should be training with a variety of people and find some training partners who aren't going to go completely apeshit on you, who aren't going to decide that today is a great day to try out that flying 411 to heel hook entry that they saw on YouTube in gi class and, see if they really can get a heel hook, a reverse heel hook to work. No, those aren't the guys you want to be training with most of the time. Once in a while you can amp it up. Once in a while you can, dial it back up to 10 or dial it back up to 11. But most of the time, you should just be training with reasonably sane people, and the focus of your training is longevity. I hope that helps. This is certainly how my training has evolved over the years. The main focus is to come back to the mats the next day. And yes, you're not going to get good as fast on any given day if you don't push it as hard, but you are going to get better in the long run because you've been accumulating more classes, more sessions, more training sessions, as opposed to having a couple really good classes, getting better at a steeper rate, and then blowing something out, blowing out your back, blowing out your knee, blowing out your shoulder, and then not being able to train at all. Okay, JR Ortega asks, what are the best stretches for flexibility in grappling? Grappling, jiu-jitsu, MMA is a whole body sport. You end up using every part of your body. You end up using your neck. You end up using your arms. You end up pushing. You end up pulling. You use your legs. You use your torso. So the easy answer is you need to stretch your entire body. Your entire body benefits from being flexible. Not crazy flexible. We're just talking reasonable flexibility. There are some studies that suggest that people who get injured are either the super not flexible people or the super flexible people. I think that was a study done in the Army for running, right? They took a whole bunch of recruits, they tested their flexibility, probably just with like that bend over and touch your toes stretch. So that's not a very accurate assessment. I'm making a bunch of assumptions here. And then they noticed that the people who got most injured in basic training were the ultra not flexible people and the ultra flexible people. So we're looking for a decent level of flexibility here. If you train 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu and you really want to get good at the double bagger or whatever the hell the latest variation of rubber guard is, then this doesn't apply to you. You need to be able to put both of your feet behind your own head, preferably without using your hands. For normal people, you want to stretch your whole body. Now, there are certain areas that need to be stretched in particular for grapplers, and that would be shoulders, back, hips, and legs. Now that's almost the whole body because not too many people spend a lot of time stretching their elbow. But having flexible legs, having flexible hips is a huge advantage. Take a look at the crazy ass guard players out there. It looks like their legs are made of rubber. Now you're probably not going to be able to achieve that unless you go back and change your parents and make yourself 12 years old again. But making sure that your hips and your legs and your back are semi-flexible. And for people who have shoulder problems, I think shoulder flexibility is a really important thing as well. J.R. Ortega also asked, what are the best drills for positions? I'm assuming he means what are the best drills to hold a position. And it's pretty obvious. If you want to get better at side mount, then you go to class, you go to your training partner, and you say, hey, I'm really trying to work on holding side mount. Would you mind if we start this round in side mount? Would you mind if we start this round in mount? Would you mind if we start this round on your back? And then you work on maintenance and attack from there. And if your opponent gets out, then you restart there. Now, obviously you need to find a willing training partner, but they're more common than you might think because most training partners recognize the importance of learning to escape from a specific position, learning to escape from the mount, learning to escape from the rear mount, learning to escape from side mount. So if you always start there, then you'll learn the details of how to hold, how to put your weight, how to attack from there. So taking a position and either isolating just holding it versus a resisting opponent, or isolating, holding it, and attacking from there against a resisting opponent, that's probably the best way to go. Now, if you're working in, say, the mount, and your opponent is always doing, say, the elbow-knee escape on you, then you're going to go and do some research. You're going to go, how to stop the elbow-knee escape, or you're going to ask your instructor, hey, how do I shut down the elbow-knee escape? Or you're going to go with that same training partner and say, hey, you're always doing this elbow-knee escape. Could you just do it in slow motion? And then go, okay, well, he's putting his hand here, so if as he's doing it, I reach down, grab his hand and his elbow, and pull that up, that shuts it down. You can figure it out yourself, sort of like a 1 or 2 man Socratic method. That's a very useful thing. So in addition to actually sparring it, go into the position and play around with it. Get your partner's feedback. I almost said opponent. At this point, he becomes a partner. Get your partner's feedback. Get the feedback of the other belts, of the senior belts in the class. Go to other people in the class and ask them the same question. Everybody deals with the same problems. Everybody deals with somebody trying to pass your guard with a knee cut. Everyone deals with, people doing a shrimp and hip escape to get out of side mount. Everyone deals with people doing the arm trap, bridge and roll out of mount. Everyone deals with the same problems. And everyone's going to develop some kind of solution to that. So the combination of both isolating that position and just sparring from that position, and when you get out, you start again, and sitting there and having a conversation around what you should be doing and what the other person's tricks are, those are 2 really good methods for getting good at a position. All right, this is an interesting question. I've actually asked it of several people. Ryan asks, my question is as follows. Although there may be many paths, what would your design of an ideal training program look like to develop a great BJJ game? For example, would you recommend to take a break for a year to do wrestling and then come back with some specialized knowledge in that area? I do not have grand plans for my children to become the next world champion anytime soon, but thinking about this was fun. And I'm curious to hear your response. If you wanted, you could even make this into a science fiction question. You have a physically capable cloned version of yourself to raise as a child whose sole purpose is to become the greatest person in jiu-jitsu since Marcelo Garcia. You can't sit on the fence, and you have to design some training strategy. What would it be? Thanks, Ryan. All right. This is an interesting question, and I've asked this of my guests in a couple of podcasts. One I just released with Bernardo Faria. He gave his answer. Another one I'm going to be releasing in the future. And I think this is a good question because it really gets to the core of someone's philosophy about training. I'm going to take a little bit of a meta level first, and then I'll try and answer your question. The meta level is that if I had some kind of child It would depend if his sole purpose, we'll assume it's a boy for the moment because it's a cloned version of myself. Yes, it is a cloned version of myself, therefore be male. So if his purpose was to become the best jiu-jitsu player of all time, so am I some kind of crazed sports parent who's trying to live vicariously through my child? That's an entirely different question. The most important thing is for that kid to actually enjoy training. Because if they don't enjoy training, then they're not going to do all the hard work, do all the sacrifice that is required. Because ultimately, sacrifice will be required. They will have to sacrifice something. They will have to not do things that other kids are doing in order to train a massive amount. They will not be going to the mall when they're 13 years old and all their friends are going to the mall. And that's pretty much the most important thing in all their peers' lives. They're going to be going to train. They're not going to be hanging out with girls quite as much. They're going to be working and training and working and then conditioning. And so they better enjoy it. So you don't want to destroy the love of training. That's number one. Number two, it's really important to recognize that there's a survivor bias in this sport. There are lots of people who've trained super hard, who got injured along the way and then quit training and then never trained again. So to some extent, when we take a look at the world champions that are out there, they've all had injuries, but we're taking a look at the semi-random selection of the initial starting pool of people who managed to get through the process without getting cripplingly injured or quit the sport level of injured. I'm sure, as I've said before, there were people out there who had as much talent as any of the champions, raw physical talent as Leandro Lowe or Rickson Gracie or, pick your champion du jour, were just as determined, maybe even more determined, super gifted, super aggressive, and then at some point at blue belt or purple belt, they ended up destroying their back by not tapping out to something or just some random collision of bodies on the mat, and they never trained again, or they never managed to successfully train hard again, and they quit jiu-jitsu. So part of the problem here is that in order to become a world champion, you need to put in many, 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 many hours. The current standard, honestly, is for world champions. They're training about 5 or 6 hours a day. They're doing a ton of training. 20 years ago, it was possible for guys who were training a couple hours a day, and then maybe once in a while going to do some additional conditioning to be world champions. That's just not true anymore. Almost all the world champions out there right now are training twice a day. The only question is, are they doing jiu-jitsu twice a day? Are they mixing jiu-jitsu with conditioning, conditioning with strength training? Are they also doing judo? Are they also doing wrestling? So recognize that a giant volume of training is going to be required. If you've never read Malcolm Gladwell's book called Outliers, I highly recommend it. In it, he talks about the 10,000 hour rule, that mastery takes 10,000 hours on average of concerted, focused practice. And to be a world champion, you probably got to put in 10,000 hours on the mat. You've got to know intuitively responses to every situation, including situations that you don't use. I mean, if you're a Spider Guard player, then you understand the ramifications of the guy getting, a pistol grip versus an edge of sleeve grip versus a tricep grip in this particular variation of lasso guard. You already understand that. But to be a world champion, you also need to understand the ramifications of some guy pulling some position that you don't use yourself. You might be a Spider Guard specialist and you run into a deep half guard specialist. You need to understand what he's trying to do. You need to understand, oh my God, he's got this grip as opposed to that grip. Oh, he's putting his weight this way as opposed to that way. He's got this instep in here or this other instep in here, or he's got his legs triangled. It's a lot harder to understand those things if you don't use that yourself. What's the answer? Well, answer one is tons and tons and tons and tons of mat time against, and this is answer two, quality opponents. You need to have a wide variety of people to train against, at least occasionally. So you might make a ton of progress in your little club, on some former trading post that's now turned into a little village out in the middle of nowhere, you might make decent progress out there. But it's really important that on a regular basis you go into the big city, to the big club, and train at a high level. And honestly, if the goal is to create a world champion, you should probably move. You should probably move and train at the biggest club that's got the best level of teachers and the best level of competition that's congruent with your own personality. That last part's really important. If you go to the perfect training environment, but you think that everyone there is an absolute asshole who doesn't care about you, well, that's not as good as going to a place where people still train really hard, but have your, that where you mesh better with that environment. So I think rather than say, yes, you should do wrestling for a year, of course you need some kind of takedown game. Do you need to be world class at it? No. Because currently in jiu-jitsu, you still have the option of pulling guards. So you just need to be better at takedowns than 50% of your opponents. And besides, training a lot in takedowns really increases the chance of injury. And that is going to that's going to come back to that point that I made about there being a survivor bias. That we're actually talking about people who've managed to survive the training process. And a lot of that is luck. So you want to stack the deck in your favor. So yes, you got to learn some takedowns. Then make sure that you're training with the best teachers that you can, that are congruent with your personality. Doesn't help if there's a total clash of personalities. Then make sure that you're training with the widest variety of training partners that you can. It doesn't necessarily have to be where your teacher is. You should be exposing yourself to training camps, to going to visit other schools, to going to, road trips and stopping in at different clubs, just to get that breadth of experience. You should be competing as often as you can. And it doesn't matter if you win or lose initially, but a lot of the world champions, not all of them, but a lot of the world champions are out there competing at local tournaments almost every single weekend. They're getting the experience. They're getting that sensation. It's just another day at the office. And then finally, it's organizing your life so you can get many hours of training, of sparring, of drilling, of just hanging out on the mats. And, hey, man, I saw this new armbar the other day, this new setup. What do you think of it? Because even that kind of casual level of hanging out and sharing techniques means your head is still in the game. I don't know if 1 hour of hanging out on the mats and bullshitting about arm bars is as valuable, contributes 1 hour towards your 10,000 hours, but it probably contributes half an hour. And the odds of getting injured during that hour of bullshitting are a lot less than hard training. So tons of hours, good teacher, wide variety of training partners, and competing a lot would be the answer, the generalized formula for that science fiction cloned version of myself. All right, next question. This sounds like a question I wrote, but I promise I didn't. Hey, Stefan, will the single leg X-Guard Masterclass and the modern leg lock formula be released as apps in the future? The answer is, I hope so. I took the modern leg lock formula off the market for a while. There are all kinds of interesting conspiracy theories about that. The truth is, I'm trying to get them passed through the Apple Store. The Apple Store has decided that jiu-jitsu apps, especially apps that are fairly similar, like volume 1, 2, 3, 4, are classified as spam apps. So I'm busy arguing with them. I've appealed to them about 10 times. I'm going, look, I have got a dedicated audience of people who really like this format and want to continue receiving it. If any of you listening work for Apple, get in touch with me through my website. I will be infinitely grateful to you, and maybe we can work together to get this sorted out. Anyhow, the goal is to get these released as apps in the future. I just don't know exactly when or what format they'll be released in, whether it'll be Android only or, as I would very much like to do, Android and Apple. Next question. If someone is looking at training purely for self-defense, would you recommend that they do some striking or focus solely on jiu-jitsu? So, training purely for self-defense. In an ideal world, you do some striking and then more grappling for self-defense. You should be conversant in basic striking, for sure. That being said, if training time is extremely limited, let's say you can only train once or twice a week, then you should spend almost all your time doing jiu-jitsu with a few takedowns as well. And then once every long while, you should also practice closing the distance against strikes. That's kind of your minimum effective self-defense dose for empty-handed self-defense. For weapons-based self-defense, or self-defense that includes weapons, that's a whole nother area. It's something that I'm beginning to cover on my Self-Defense Tutorials YouTube channel and Self-Defense Tutorials website. That would be www.selfdefensetutorials.com. The game against weapons is much more complicated, so let's just restrict this to empty-handed for now. So if you have 3 or 4 training sessions a week, then yeah, for sure, do boxing or kickboxing, at least one of those sessions, or MMA for that matter. Do 1 or 2 sessions a week, and then you'll have that completely covered, especially if you're doing MMA, because MMA, you're talking about blending the ranges. You're talking about going from striking to grappling. You're talking going from grappling to striking. You're talking about striking while grappling. You're talking about defending against strikes when you're grappling. So that's a very good strategy. And then, of course, you do jiu-jitsu on top of that. If you have very limited time, then mostly spend your time doing jiu-jitsu. Once in a while, do some takedowns, and once in a while, do some closing against striking. You know, if you want to practice your jab and your cross in your living room at home, you know, to punch the heavy bag occasionally, great. You're probably going to develop some bad habits, but at least you'll have a basic idea how to throw a punch, which is better than no idea how to throw a punch. But you don't want to do just a tiny bit of boxing and then figure that you're a boxer. You see this sometimes in MMA. Some jiu-jitsu guy or wrestler goes and trains just enough boxing to get in his head that he's a boxer. And then he spends the round trying to box instead of doing what he's good at, which is, in the example I've chosen, closing the distance and bring the fight to the ground. All right, next question from Dave. If you had to rank physical attributes like strength, speed, flexibility, cardiovascular endurance, etc., in order of importance for jiu-jitsu competition, what would you assign as first, second, third, etc., and why? In other words, how should competitors prioritize and organize their time developing these various attributes? So people have been listening to me for a while on this podcast, in my videos, on my YouTube channels, on my emails are going to groan because they know what's coming. I think the most important attribute is endurance. Without endurance, you don't have any other attributes. If you're tired, then you're not strong. If you're tired, then you're not fast. If you're tired, you're not even smart. You can't even think. Imagine you've just done a run as hard as you can for a mile. You're bent over, you're gasping for breath, and now somebody comes and gives you a simple child's puzzle to solve, like a puzzle where all pieces fit together. You probably won't be able to do it because you're exhausted. In fact, a friend of mine was trying out for the JTF2, which is like the Canadian equivalent of Delta Force. And he said that a lot of their selection process is you're going to be worked absolutely to exhaustion, and then they give you a little puzzle to solve, whether it's a word problem or a little math problem or a physical problem, like, oh, see how these two pieces connect together, detach them. And it's problem solving while exhausted. The fact that they're using this as a selection criteria means it isn't easy. It means that as you become exhausted, you become stupider. So, number one is endurance. Now, is it anaerobic or aerobic endurance? This varies. Almost all the experts say that the focus of your training for competition should be anaerobic endurance. They say that matches are 5 minutes long, 6 minutes long. MMA rounds are usually 5 minutes long. This isn't long enough for your aerobic endurance to matter. And they're experts. However, having tested it for myself, I have found that for myself, Aerobic endurance is more important. If I compete after having done a ton of anaerobic training, we're talking like 20-second sprints, 30-second sprints, 1-minute sprints, stair runs, Tabata intervals, it's better than me not having done any conditioning at all. But the times I feel the best, competed the best, roll the best is if I've done a ton of long distance aerobic, long LSD training, long, slow distance, aerobic training. That's personal. How do you find out what works for you? Experience. Try them both. Spend a couple of months doing nothing but sprint work. Nothing but 20-second Tabata intervals, 30-second sprints, 1-minute sprints, stair sprints, and then see how your jiu-jitsu changes. And then spend a couple of months doing longer sessions, 20-minute sessions on the Stairmaster, 1-hour runs, 1-hour bike rides, and see how your jiu-jitsu changes. If you don't like how it changes, you can always go back. There's nothing permanent happening here. So some form of endurance is the most important thing. After that, I would say strength, but more specifically for jiu-jitsu competition, because that's how the question was framed, grip strength. If you're doing jiu-jitsu with the gi, then grip strength is super important because it's one of the first things to go. If you come back from a layoff of not having done jiu-jitsu for a while, first of all, your jiu-jitsu specific endurance sucks. Secondly, your timing is off. So hopefully timing's not really an attribute in the way that we're talking here. And thirdly, your hands are completely exhausted because they're not used to gripping cloth. So grip endurance or grip strength is really important. Thirdly, I would say whole body strength and whole body stability, because if your whole body is somewhat strengthened, then the odds of there being a big muscular imbalance and you really critically hurting yourself or blowing out some part of your body, either in training for competition or in competition itself, get reduced. So I would say whole body strength / whole body stability. After that, flexibility is important. Explosiveness is important, but that depends more on your game, right? If you're more of a slow, methodical player, then, obviously, if you were more explosive, that would be useful, but it depends on your game. If you're basing your game off the rubber guard, well, yeah, flexibility is going to be super important. If you're basing it off of spider guard, flexibility is useful, not as important. If you're basing your game off of the closed guard, well, flexibility is useful, but it's not as important as the strength of your legs and the strength of your core to be able to pull somebody down. So it really begins depending on your game. All right, so number 1, endurance. Number 2, grip strength. Number 3, whole body strength / stability. Next question comes from Harry. Do you have a bodyweight fitness routine that you follow? Love your videos, been watching some. I started training 4 years ago. Okay. Back when I started training with Marcus Suarez, he would start out every class with a bodyweight fitness routine that would vary every day, but basically it would be a 20 to 25 minute long, horrendous combination of jumping jacks, squats, burpees, sit-ups, and they would be in sets or in cycles. So you might start out, I'm just making this up, 10 squats, 1 push-up, then jumping jacks, then 9 squats, 2 push-ups, then 8 squats, 3 push-ups. And you might go through that cycle a number of times. The next class might be 10 push-ups, 10 squats, 10 sit-ups, 10 push-ups, 10 squats, and so on. So there was a general pattern to this. I don't do that much right now. In terms of bodyweight fitness, yes, I'll do push-ups, especially if I'm traveling. You can always do push-ups. I'll do pull-ups. Pull-ups are super important. I've done a couple different videos about the different kinds of pull-ups that are on my various YouTube channels. Pull-ups you can usually do less of them than push-ups, so they're more of a strength exercise, but pulling is really important for grappling, especially for gi-based grappling, because you can get a handle and then you pull toward yourself. Squats, I do some. Lunges, I do some. Crunches and the various bodyweight ab exercises, I definitely do some of those as well. Most of the time these days, that's for when I'm traveling. So I don't have a routine per se. I actually have started over the years separating my cardio and my strength training. That seems to work well for me. Combining it all together in one giant type CrossFit thing where you're doing, where you're running and then you're lifting and then you're doing explosive movements, then you run and then you lift and you do explosive movements. I don't find that as useful for myself. I'm sure there are other people out there for whom that works. It's really a question of knowing yourself. For me, I'm finding the best results right now for my goals and my abilities to separate out the cardio, to do my endurance training, and that's typically on a machine or climbing a mountain or running or on a bike or an airdyne, something like that, and then doing my weight training separately, and then using the body weight to fill in the gaps. Next question. I would like to know if you have any good tips regarding knuckle and joint pain in your hands. What do you do to prevent soreness? And do you have any post-training routines which help to minimize finger and hand pains? And then he says that he saw a video by some guy on the Daniel Strauss, who I don't know, who recommends leaving Play-Doh in the fridge and then working this through your hands after each training session, which is intended to act as a form of cold therapy. Okay, first of all, I know nothing about freezing Play-Doh. It sounds like an interesting strategy. My suggestion, since there's probably no downside here unless you fall asleep with a giant pile of frozen Play-Doh on your hand and get frostbite, if that doesn't happen, give it a try. See if it relieves the hand and finger pain. The number one suggestion I have for you, well, actually I've got two suggestions. The number one is to tape your fingers. I sometimes tape my fingers when I'm feeling joint pain in my fingers. That being said, I don't have a very, very grip-intensive game. I don't play a lot of Spider Guard or De La Riva Guard where I'm absolutely hanging onto that sleeve, as if it's a rope with my child dangling off the other end of it over the edge of a cliff, where I can't let go at any cost. I do let go, at not a very high cost. So I don't have a very grip-intensive game, but that speaks to my not needing to tape my fingers very often. However, as an experiment, I did do this. I did tape one hand. There's a video on my YouTube channel of how to tape your fingers for jiu-jitsu. If you go to youtube.com/Stefan Kesting and you search in the older videos, you'll find it. I did it with Rob Bernacki. And I taped one hand and I didn't tape the other. And I did jiu-jitsu. And at the end of that session, I noticed that there was actually quite a difference in between my hands. The one that was taped felt great. The one that wasn't taped felt sore, felt achy. And I hadn't realized that my hands felt achy after jiu-jitsu until I did this. So either try to figure out if this will work for you. Try taping one hand and not the other. Or just tape them both. That's for sure, that cuts down on knuckle and joint pain. I'm not exactly sure about the underlying mechanisms of why that is, but it's undeniable that it helps a lot of people. Number two is be prepared to release your grips. Don't train such a grip-intensive game. If you've got a sleeve grip and the guy's just reefing on it, pulling, and he's stepping on your bicep and trying to pull his grip free, man, let go and go to something else. Let go and go to something else. It's just going to mangle your hands. You're going to get arthritis and you won't be able to train. And my third suggestion is do some no-gi. You can still train jiu-jitsu and get better at your grappling if every second session or every third session is a no-gi session. In fact, it'll help you. It'll improve your scrambling. It'll improve your speed. It'll improve your reflexes. And when you bring that back and put the gi on again, you'll just be better off for it. Plus, because you can't hang on to cloth, because you can't do those ultra gi grip intensive positions that we often use in jiu-jitsu, your fingers will be better off for it. So, sure, give the Play-Doh a try, but tape your fingers, don't fight to the death for grips, and 3, do no gi. Next question comes from Mike. I used to lift weights 3 times a week and my joints felt healthier, in brackets stabilized, than they do now that I do jiu-jitsu 3 times a week in place of weights. Any suggestions on joint health for jiu-jitsu players, supplements, exercises? All right, so you know the answer. You already know the answer. When you did weights 3 times a week, your joints felt healthy. Now that you're doing jiu-jitsu 3 times a week, for your body, for your age, for your physical condition, you don't feel as healthy. Well, do weight training at least 1 day a week. At least 1 day a week. It takes 10 years to get a jiu-jitsu black belt. It'll take a whole lot longer if your unhealthy, non-stabilized joints keep on breaking on you or get injured. So better that you take one of those training sessions, or alternately, train 4 times a week and do jiu-jitsu 3 times a week and lift once a week. If that made your joints feel better, then go back to that. You don't need to lift 3 times a week to get, sort of the minimum effective dose. Honestly, the minimum effective dose of weightlifting is once a week. If you do a whole body workout, do a couple, 2 to 3 sets. We're talking about working sets here, not warm up. If you warm up and then do 2 or 3 working sets of squat, 2 or 3 working sets of bench press, 2 or 3 working sets of some form of deadlift, 2 or 3 working sets of pull-ups, and then, your vanity muscles, work your biceps, work your abs, work your traps. That's an hour workout. And you've covered most of your bases. If you're doing compound multi-joint exercises like the squat, like the deadlift, that covers off a whole bunch of stuff. You don't need to work your thoracic back, your cervical back, your lumbar back, your upper lumbar, your lower lumbar. No, just do a squat. Just do a deadlift. If you were lifting 3 times a week, then you've got enough experience to figure out how to get a whole body workout in once a week. Try it, see if it's enough, see if it makes a difference, see how you feel. You can always undo this. You can always stop doing it and say, well, once a week doesn't make any difference. All right, then you go to plan B. But for you, you should try at least lifting once a week and then doing jiu-jitsu 2, and if you can sneak it in 3 times a week, that would be best. Next question. I would like to know about recovery time between workouts and rolling sessions at age 50. Is it even recommended to strength train at all, since more rest days are necessary? So I just answered this. Basically, yes. I think as you get older, it's actually more important to strength train. Unless your body is holding itself together, unless your body, the joints are stabilized, you're not going to be able to train. So actually, as you get older, the strength training comes first. That might be heresy, but the strength training comes first. I think once a week of doing some strength training, even if that cuts in your jiu-jitsu, will mean that you end up doing more jiu-jitsu training in the long run. It means you're going to be active in the sport longer because you'll be healthier. In terms of recovery time between workouts, that's so individual. It really depends on your genetics. It really depends on your general state of health. It depends on your nutrition. It depends on your sleep. Now, that's not just a cop-out. You can do something about some of those things. You can really improve your nutrition. You can make sure you're not eating junk food. If I ask you right now, what are 2 or 3 things that you can do to improve your diet? Well, I could drink less. Well, I could not have chips. Well, I eat ice cream every single day. All right. So there are 3 things that you know you need to change already. I'm not saying, I don't know you. I don't know if those are your vices, but you probably could improve your nutrition. Eating something within 30 to 40 minutes after you finish training, that's a big tip for recovery. Eat something with carbs, eat something with nutrients, eat something with protein. Even if it's just some kind of protein shake, better than nothing. If you get something in right after training, your muscles will replenish themselves and start repairing themselves faster. That's something that a lot of people miss. I'm amazed how many people go to jiu-jitsu class and then go off to go work without hydrating and without eating something. Also, sleep. Are you getting enough sleep? You're 50 years old. You probably need less sleep than you did when you were young, but at the same time, you're also probably in your work prime, which means there are probably more pressures on you to work now than there ever have been before. But you can't burn both ends of the candle indefinitely. You can't keep on using this credit card and drawing down on it, drawing down on it, drawing down on it. And I'm going to get up early to go to work, and then I'm going to go and train, and then I'm going to stay up late and do more work. You can't do that indefinitely. You can't keep on taking out payments or making payments with your credit card without putting something back in. And in a physical training, in a sport sense, paying off your credit card, that's sleep and recovery. So what can you do to improve your sleep? And what can you do to improve the amount and the quality of your sleep and your recovery? That is just as important as the intervals between the training sessions. All right. Am I too small to BJJ? BJJ as a verb. Being told that I'm small, I'm 5'9", but I'm wiry and strong. I've got short arms and short legs. Does this give a lanky person an advantage and me a disadvantage? No. There are lots of small people doing jiu-jitsu. You're 5'9". You're way taller than most women doing jiu-jitsu. There are tons of great world-class grapplers who are 5'9", 5'8", 5'7". The fact that you don't have long arms and long legs, okay, you're not going to be a spider guard specialist. You're probably not going to be a De La Riva guard specialist. But there are many styles of guard, there are many styles of jiu-jitsu, many styles of passing that don't require long arms and long legs. In some ways, you're an advantage for some things. You're probably a lot harder to armbar than me. Right? I've got these big, long, flapping arms, scarecrow-like build. Well, it's a lot easier to armbar me than it is some guy who's got little, short T-Rex arms. So there are advantages and there are disadvantages. Go and do a search for some of the smaller grapplers out there, the Bruno Malfacinis of the world. Go look for the smaller, more compact grapplers. Go look at how the lightweight guys are doing their jiu-jitsu. And if you can, go and find some footage of the smaller, lightweight guys rolling against really big guys. Because even if they have relatively long arms for being 5'6", when they go against, or relatively long legs for being 5'6", when they go against some big giant guy, well, guess what? All their advantage of leg length is gone. So you are not too small to BJJ. Next question comes from Clive. Boy, there are a lot of injury questions today. I'm from South Africa. I sustained a knee injury from rugby when I was younger. It bothers me a bit when I'm rolling, specifically when pressure is applied to it. Do I have any tips or specific training to protect or to strengthen my knee? Without knowing exactly what's wrong and without me being a doctor, neither of which are true, this is a really difficult question. I have been fairly lucky with my knees. I've got some issues, but nothing too crazy. But it really depends. Is it a torn ligament or a strained ligament? Is it a piece of cartilage that's floating around? Is it some kind of bursitis? It really depends on what the specifics are. And the solutions depend on what the problem is. So I would try to get to a sports medicine guy. I wouldn't just go to a regular doctor. I'd go, I don't know what the referral system in South Africa, let me say this correctly, South Africa. I don't know what the referral system in South Africa is, but you may need to go to your general family doctor and get a referral to a specialist. Honestly, going to see a specialist for sports injuries really is 100% worth it. Your GP, he's going to see if your knee is stable and come up, like, oh, okay, you should go do some physio. That'll be the big takeaway. Go do some physio. It's just really passing the buck. Go see a sports medicine specialist, get a real diagnosis for what's wrong with your knee, and then say, I'm engaging in this sport. It's a lot like wrestling, right? There's lots of lateral pressure and different pressures on my knee. What can I do? And then maybe a knee brace. I mean, you can't wear like big ass RoboCop knee braces in competition, but if you're not competing, then it doesn't matter. I had a friend who blew out his ACL and he wore this gigantic RoboCop knee brace for years. And then eventually got fixed and eventually he weaned himself off of the knee brace. In his case, a knee brace did the trick. Maybe a patellar strap for you will do the trick. Maybe there are some specific exercises that you need to do. Wobble board exercises, squats, deadlifts. I don't know what the problem is. You got to diagnose the problem and you got to talk to a specialist. And then there's probably a way to do the sport. And finally, it's like, doctor, my knee hurts when I do this position. Don't do that position. If your knee hurts, tap out. If your leg gets caught in a weird position where the guy's putting weight on it and he's doing some kind of sleeping bag guard pass and just crushing your knee and it hurts, tap out. Dude, my knee's caught, tap, tap. And then go and start again. There's absolutely zero to be gained from suffering through a position that's aggravating an injury. Yes, there's lots of suffering in jiu-jitsu. There's lots of grinning and bearing and suffering and taking pain and taking discomfort. But all that goes out the window and it's not character building anymore when it's affecting an injured body part, because it's going to make that injury worse. So if your leg gets caught in a bad position, tap out. Change the position. If let them pass your guard if it's during guard passing. If I'm just trying to think of what positions might be injuring your knee, and I don't know. So whatever position is bugging your knee, just tap out and live to play another day. Next question. I have a few questions. I train 5 days a week in the morning. What would you recommend for post-training nutrition? Well, I answered this already. First, are you doing pre-training nutrition? Are you training on an empty stomach? You shouldn't be. You should be having some kind of healthy food, whatever your stomach can bear. You don't want to eat right before you train for most people. That's a good way to throw up. So eat something before to give you energy to train. And then for post-training nutrition, I mean, the standard easy answer is a shake, right? If you have a shake, put some kind of fruit in it. I like blueberries. Some kind of base. I like almond milk. Some kind of protein. I use a vegetable-based protein powder or some eggs. You know, I put raw eggs in there. Yes, in theory, I could get salmonella. The reality is I've eaten hundreds of dozens of raw eggs and I've never had that problem. So, of course, as soon as I say this, I'm going to come down with a wicked case of salmonella. So don't do as I say, do as I do. Never eat raw eggs. But basically some protein, some carbs, some fruit or vegetables or something that's nutritious, and try and eat that within half an hour. If you do a search for post-workout shake, you'll find 1,000 different recipes. Some of them are completely unpalatable. Find one that actually works for you and then play around with it and buy a blender and you'll be a post-workout shake expert in no time. What are some must-do flexibility drills for older students? I am 64 years old. All right. I answered a question earlier in the podcast about flexibility. I think the same thing applies to you, except you need to pay even more attention to flexibility. We become less flexible as we get older. I would really suggest doing some additional yoga if you have the time, and experiment with different kinds of yoga. There's types of yoga that are all about chakra linking and navel gazing and breathing, and those may or may not be good, but it's not what you need for jiu-jitsu. Then there might be hot yoga. You know, Bikrams are a million different variants of it, and that may or may not be good for you. It depends on what your needs are. So I would spend a couple of weeks going to every yoga place in town and trying out a class, paying for a class, doing a class, and keeping notes, and then go and then you'll have a way better understanding of stretching and flexibility than you do right now. And you'll know what makes your body feel good. Another important thing, and I should have mentioned this earlier, when it comes to stretching, you want to be warmed up when you stretch. A useful rule of thumb, it's not one that I always live by, but it's useful, is you should basically have a sheen of sweat over your whole body by the time that you stretch. So make sure that you warm up by skipping rope, by going for a jog, by doing a bunch of push-ups. Get your body warm and get your body sweating before you start your stretching. And finally, how do I improve my game with younger aggressive students? Again, there seem to be some themes in today's podcast, and you've touched on the third theme. You don't want to match these guys move for move. You don't want to match these guys struggle for struggle. If you do, you're going to lose. You want to use your technique to survive. You want to use your technique, if you can, to dominate. Go listen to the Mordecai Finley podcast that I did with him. I want to say earlier this year, early 2017. Mordecai Finley, I think he got his black belt in his 60s. Super useful information for you. All right, next question. This is a long question. I'm going to paraphrase it. It's from Ian. Basically, he's gone through a bunch of injuries and he's now returned to training and he's 60 years old. So now he hasn't done much sparring recently, particularly with the young, larger white belts. And when he does, he says, like, please don't go flat out, go slowly, I've been injured, I don't want to be again. Thus far, while both instructors and training partners have been good and looked after me, I've learned to not go flat out and strain so hard that I'm more likely to injure myself. It seems a little unfair to my training partners. So he's worried about imposing on his training partners by saying, hey dude, can we not go full out here? Hey dude, I'm 30 years older than you. Can we just take it easy? And he's worried about his training partners essentially not being fair to them, not giving them a decent workout. And in general, I don't think you need to worry about it. Let's start with the exception. Here's when that's not appropriate. If you've got some guy who's 30 years old, he's getting ready for his first MMA fight, or he's competing next weekend, or he's just completely unable to stop himself. He's one of these people who compulsively goes super hard no matter what he's doing, then it's not fair to ask him to slow down. If he's about to compete, if he's about to fight, he needs to go hard. He needs to go with people who are at his level and just basically bang it out. And it needs to be a collision. And don't ask to go easy with those guys. In fact, avoid those guys. It's not fair to you because you're going to get injured. It's not fair to them because they need to go hard. So that's the exception. Here's the general rule. Of course, it's okay to say, hey, dude, can we just go easy today? Hey, dude, can we just work this one position? Hey, dude, can I start on your back? I'm working on my back attacks. And if you get out, can we do something? Can we go back there and start again? It's totally appropriate. Presumably, you train at a club that's got a whole bunch of people. If there are 30 people and there are one or two guys who are going light or would just want to train specific positions, that's part of the game. And if I'm going with you and you can only go light, then I'll work on something technical. I'll work on getting one submission from one position, and learn different ways to set it up, or to just go light and to try and match your movement with movement and not put weight on heavy people. You can see footage of world champions who just smash their opponents in competition, training with women, training with older guys, training with injured people, training with white belts. And they're going easy. They're matching them. And yeah, they're not getting a great workout, but they're still rolling. They're still moving. They're still doing jiu-jitsu, and it's still good for them. And who knows, maybe it's a good break for them as well. The final thing I'll say is it might be really useful to you if you find a couple of other training partners who are in the same boat and do not all your training with them, but do a lot of your training with them. I guarantee you that there are other people who are in the same boat of not wanting to get injured, being older, and having to take it easy, who are willing to go at your pace. So find out who they are. They may even be at other clubs. You may need to go to open mats to train with them. You may need to bring them to your home dojo or your home mat arrangement, or buy some mats, put them in a garage and roll with them somewhere. Go to a judo club when after hours, or some college that's got mats, and go train with them. So find some people who are like-minded, but don't be worried about occasionally imposing on the young, bigger, more aggressive 30-year-old and saying, hey, can we go easy today? They should be able to handle it. This is part of doing jiu-jitsu. This is part of paying it forward. Those 30-year-olds are getting the opportunity to show you the respect that you deserve and that you need. They're paying it forward, and then when they're 40, 50, and 60 years old, hopefully the next generation will pay it forward to them. All right, next question and final question. I've got a question, goes the question. I've been training for 2 years and received my blue belt last month. I started doing the advanced classes with the upper belts, and I'm also getting over an injury that, although nearly healed, really messed with my confidence. My question, is it normal to feel like I'm in way over my head, like I didn't deserve the blue belt, and I'm way out of my depth? Thanks, Miles. This is a really good question, and it's a very common concern. And since this is your blue belt, this is your first major promotion in the sport of jiu-jitsu. So I'm going to introduce you to the idea of the bullseye that comes on your back with every promotion. On the one hand, if you're just a high-level white belt, and you're rolling with other white belts, yeah, of course you're trying to get each other. But the second you get that blue belt, you've got this giant bullseye and everyone under you starts going, they want to tap themselves a blue belt, right? It's way cooler to tap out a blue belt than it is to tap out another white belt. And so everyone underneath you is gunning for you all of a sudden. On the other hand, you might also now be going to the advanced class, and I've never trained at places that really separate out blue belts and above, but I recognize this is a pretty common practice. So all of a sudden you're training with experienced blue belts and purple belts and brown belts and black belts, and they're all smashing you. And this is completely normal. This is part of the game. And in fact, it's part of the incentive to get better. So your question made me think of something that I'd read in a Rolling Stone article a long time ago. So I went and looked it up. And this Rolling Stone article was about Eric Clapton, who in the early 60s was playing with the Yardbirds. So it was one of the early sort of blues groups. And they ended up as the band for Sonny Boy Williamson when Sonny Boy Williamson was doing a tour. And Sonny Boy Williamson was one of the blues legends. So here, I'm going to read from the 1993 Rolling Stones article on Eric Clapton. And I quote, "When Sonny Boy Williamson, the irascible, hardcore Delta bluesman, undertook a tour of England with the Yardbirds as his backup band, the experience precipitated a crisis for Clapton. I realized we weren't being true to the music," he said. "It was a frightening experience because this man was real and we weren't. We didn't know how to back him up, and he put us through some bloody hard paces. I was very young, and it was a real shock. I had to almost relearn how to play." And then, the story goes, he went and stayed with a friend for a month, locked himself in a room, and did nothing but blues riffs for a month. Some parts of the legend say a year. It's apparently not true, for a month. And if I say greatest blues guitar player of the 20th and even 21st century, it's hard not to put Eric Clapton in the top 5 of that list. Eric Clapton is an amazing player, but he went through the same thing that you went through. He basically kind of got promoted. Now he's playing in the band as a backup player for a black belt, a 10th degree black belt in blues. And he's like, holy crap, I don't know what I'm doing. I suck. You got promoted. You're now playing in a different pool and you're going, holy crap, I suck. Well, use this energy to refocus your training. You won't get any better if you lock yourself in a room for a month and just do nothing but shrimping. That's not the way jiu-jitsu works. But do the equivalent. Say, wow, I'm at level 3, but I see now that there's level 20, 40, 100. I need to add to my game. Use this as inspiration. Use this as a goad to get you up to the next level, not as some kind of crushing defeat to say, I hate jiu-jitsu, I'm no good. Everybody goes through this. The first time that you roll with a jiu-jitsu world champion, you will feel like a child. You will feel like you're a baby and somebody just stealing candy away from you. It's that humbling. So you can either take this experience and say, I suck, or you can take this experience and say, wow, there's a lot more to learn. You're going to have to improve. So that's fantastic. Good for you. Congratulations on your blue belt. Congratulations on getting smashed. Congratulations on your dark night of the soul. You're going to get better. It'll get better if you keep at it. So on that note, I think we're going to wrap up the podcast. Thank you so much to the people who sent in the questions. I really appreciate it. I do try to respond to the emails that I get from people on my email newsletter list. I don't always succeed. I do read it all. I don't always manage to get back to everybody. I do have a few other things to do in my life other than spend the entire day reading and answering email. But I recognize that you're taking time out of your day to send me emails as well. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you on the next podcast.